Welcome to what is likely going to be the review of the oldest work that I will ever cover, Voyage Dans La Lune, A Trip to the Moon. I originally recorded this while working on the Star Wars background material, inspired to go back to the dawn of science fiction films with this work, likely the only case I'll have of my work being longer than the source material itself. This is about 70% examination and 30% me just screwing around, but I hope you still enjoy it. In much the same way that Star Wars would require the creation of a special effects company in order to bring George Lucas's vision to the screen, the creation of this film demanded the invention of special effects itself. And this would be done by Georgia Melies. The young Melies fell in love with stage magic and eventually sold his share of the family's shoe business in order to open his own theater to be able to perform. Unfortunately, the whole act was a bit stale, so business was hard. But from such misfortune, greatness often comes. Melies worked to develop entirely new illusions and to introduce more comedy and more theatrics into the act, such as his signature act of having a man's head removed while it's giving a lecture and having it continue the lecture until it is again restored to his neck, without interruption. All of this gave Melies the lateral thinking needed to overcome problems that would serve him well when his new passion emerged, film. And to say it was a passion would be an understatement. The lengths that he went to in order to start his own film company were extraordinary, even necessitating the invention of technical equipment in order to finally have the means to create films his way. Over time, though, he would be able to purchase everything he needed from professional companies, but during this early period, he was able to explore some of the possibilities that film allowed for. Some were by serendipity. In the beginning, films were often simply capturing events that were taking place, buildings being collapsed, trains crashing, and so on. Even the mundane aspects of regular life were interesting with this newfangled film stuff. So it happened that Melies was filming a city street and suddenly his camera jammed. He fixed it and continued filming, and when he developed it, he discovered something fantastic. He had filmed a bus transforming into a hearse and men transforming into women. Quite obviously, what had happened was that by the time he fixed his camera, street traffic had changed, and so different objects and people were in the place of where the others had been previously. But this accidental discovery showed how you could use the camera to achieve optical tricks that were literally impossible outside of the medium of film. Completely obvious to us. Revolutionary genius for its time. By using what he knew of stage magic, he was capable of pulling further tricks with the cameras until he was achieving things that people could not believe that they were actually seeing. Now over in America, Thomas Edison had been working on some things himself, approaching special effects from a technical rather than a theatrical background. But in many ways, Melies was achieving things that his studio not only wasn't, but couldn't understand how he was doing it. Edison, well known to be an asshole, tried to stop foreign films from being brought into America so he wouldn't have to worry about competition. But then he found another way, one that would allow him to have the last laugh over Melies. Melies produced a variety of film types, and eventually he decided that he was going to create the spectacular A Voyage to the Moon. It was sort of the Pirates of the Caribbean of its day, in that it was a film based upon a very popular ride over in New York City. But it also drew upon a parody of Jules Verne's work to flesh it out a little bit more. Let's take a look at A Voyage to the Moon. As you can gather, this is a place of high learning. There's instruments of various kinds, and of course the chalkboard and people ready to take notes and all that stuff, and of course a gathering of wizards. In some ways this is meant to be literal because, well, you'll see in a moment. Now, of course, is the time for the delivery of their telescopes from the No, We Are Definitely Not Compensating for Something School of Astronomy. And at last arrives Barbophonie. This lead character is played by Melies himself. He would often appear in his own films. And he is here to make his grand proposal. But first, a little bit of trickery. Yes, those wizards, they do love to show off. Now, you have to keep in mind with all of this that we're at the dawn of filmmaking, okay? The concepts even of silent films are simply not present here yet. There's no piano music playing that you would often have. There's no cards up providing you dialogue or anything like that. This is just presenting the story and assuming that you can follow through simply by the actions that you're witnessing here. It's a fairly brave thing. You can gather from this that he's proposing to launch from the Earth to the moon, while everyone in the crowd is convinced this is crazy, it can't be done.
I'm telling you, you can't do it, and I'd bet these bed sheets that I'm wearing that you can't.
Oh, perhaps if you read my notes it will help. There, is that better? Can you read that now, huh? I told you having Santa Claus in here was a mistake. He thinks everything's about him. While that guy gets demoted, the professor gives an impassioned plea and finally convinces some of them to join him on this trip. The 5 men who will join him, and please forgive my lack of understanding of French. Alcofre-Seba, he was a character in another of Melies' works, along with Peripheragaramas. I have no idea if that's even close to right, sorry, but yeah. In any event, this is another character from one of his works. Then there was Nostradamus, no explanation there. Omega, which actually would require some explanation, but I'm afraid I don't have any. And Micromegaw, which was a character in another science fiction work by Voltaire, who was an alien visitor to Earth. Now, as they're getting suited up here, the thing that you should understand is that the point being made is not, look at these people going on a grand adventure. It's supposed to be, look at this bunch of assholes. See, Melies, when he was trying to earn a living, had taken a part-time job as a political cartoonist. And so he had a few opinions about things. And so this, while it is in a sense a grand adventure, he's basically also using this whole thing to serve as a satire upon colonialism. And so this group here of supposedly learned men are really just a bunch of dickheads out to go and cause some trouble while they think they're oh so great.
Mind getting out of the way, Spinach Chin? We're trying to do some work here.
But as you can see, the working men are doing all of the hard effort, while all the men of science and reason and mystery and all that are just getting in the way. What we see here is another thing that Melies created, which is the dissolve. It's something we so take for granted we don't even think about it. I mean, did you really even register it without me pointing it out to you? And yet, this was something that he created to help show this transition here taking place as the men go to look at the giant apparatus that's being built in the distance there. See, the plan for these guys is they're going to get to the moon by getting inside of a giant hollowed-out shell and firing it from an enormous cannon. You can tell they're smart men, can't you? Anyway, as you can tell, this is France, so any excuse to put pretty girls into ridiculous clothing. So now, men, we are going to go to the moon in our fabulous contraption here, but we need to have a name for ourselves, something about us that shows we're traveling to the great beyond. Now, being noblemen of France and all of that, we should be thinking about our culture, the great men such as Voltaire and Victor Hugo and the like. And so I propose in honor of that, we, travelers to the stars, shall name ourselves after Hugo and call ourselves Huguenots. Anyone disagree with that? I thought it was a good name. Sounded kind of familiar, but I think it works. Move over, I want to sit by the window.
No, I want to sit by the window. I want to sit by the window. I told you all there's no window in here. He's touching me. He's touching me. I am not. He's touching me. I told him not to touch me. He's on my side. That's your side of the cannon shell and my side of the cannon shell.
The ladies here were actually members of a local ballet company that was at the Théâtre du Châtelet at the time. Melies would frequently bring in people from various theaters and such to work with him. For instance, one of the magicians who used to perform in his acts actually has makes an appearance in this film. Okay, Pierre, you know that it's more than just aiming this thing at the moon, right? I mean, I know the moon is big, but there is a lot of math involved here. I hope you didn't just point it and figure that was good enough. All this pomp and circumstance is, of course, to play up the nationalism that's involved in these kind of an exploration things, which again is part of the overall satirization of colonialism.
This shot was another invention that Melies had come up with. Basically, he put the actor onto a seat that was mounted on rails, and then with a pulley system pulled it towards the camera to make it look like they're zooming in on it to create this iconic image of the moon. So here we have them making a safe landing upon the moon and getting out. Everyone remember where we parked, okay? No spacesuits, of course, just the regular suits. Although it is a little known fact that you can survive for 10 hours in the air inside of a top hat. Some have argued that this work doesn't qualify as science fiction for this kind of reason, that there's no real attention being paid to those kinds of elements of it that you would see in other science fiction works. But I don't think that really applies here. This is clearly a science fiction tale because of the fantastical nature of the events involved, and that, well, besides the literal application of magic as in conjuring tricks, this really is more about science as opposed to magic, and thus science fiction as opposed to fantasy. Although Melies would be known for his fairy stories, as he would like to call it, one of which did in fact involve a sort of astronomy thing of demons being sent down from the moon to go and harass some astronomer. Maybe this whole thing is payback for that. Despite the fact that this is in many ways a satire, nevertheless, this was an extremely ambitious work on Melies' part. You know, think about all of the time that's been put into all of this stuff. Again, for a film that is very, very long for its time period. This was the longest film that he had made. And all those people up there, you know, he was paying for that and paid generously. He was noted for that. It also included free lunch when he did that. As a result of all this extra performers and all these lavish expenses for everything to make this look as good as possible, it wound up costing 10,000 francs to make at the time, which adjusted for inflation is about $4.1 million for a 13-minute film. As you can see, it's begun snowing on them on the moon. I'm sure they're blaming Santa Claus for this. It's his revenge for us leaving him behind. The thing to keep in mind with this film is that at this time, this length was incredibly long. I mean, it may be only less than 13 minutes here, but for that time, that was basically the extended edition of Lord of the Rings as far as audiences would be concerned. Plus, it took a long time to shoot, too. I mean, it was 3 months for them to make this film, which was a long time. Again, remember, we're talking about what is a very short film by today's standards. Yet at the time, it tied up so many of his resources, especially because of the way it was shot. He had a special studio built with glass walls and ceilings so that they could use sunlight for it. Thus, he would have a certain period of time during the day when he would be able to get the filming shot with the best use of the sun. Now, note the way the moon creature, the selenite, is destroyed here. Okay, he had to cut the shot, have the actor removed, and put an explosion in there, all to sync up with the striking of the umbrella there. Again, it's so seamless to us looking back at it now, but realize how revolutionary that was at the time for him to just hit something with an umbrella and destroy it. And of course, this continues the whole mockery of colonialism thing. I mean, that creature might be terrifying looking, but it wasn't doing anything to them. All it was doing was dancing about oddly in front of them, and they decided to just whack it and blow it up. Another one comes along and they do the same. So here they are being arrested, but not to worry, we have a plan. And this is why we should have sent Hulk Hogan to the moon. One body slam would have conquered them all. Needless to say, watching these jerks kill their king has made the locals really pissed off. So, of course, our bumbling explorers have to get the hell out of there. And with, of course, our hero being ready to slaughter more of them in the midst of their escape. Probably should have waited for the massive guys with pointy sticks to show up. That might have made it go better. Anyway, they have a brilliant idea about how to get back to Earth. All you have to do is take the rocket to the edge and then push it off the moon, and gravity will bring you back down to Earth. That's just logic. Melies had a lot tied up in this movie, of course, so it was priced rather highly, and for that reason he had a little bit of trouble selling it at first. The legend goes that he let one exhibitor borrow a print of the film in order to show for free just to show how well people were going to love this thing. And God, was he right, because the applause from it was so great that they stayed around again and again and again to keep watching this film. And the theater owner, of course, bought it right away. And when he was reminded, oh, yeah, you didn't even want to buy this, he actually gave an extra 200 francs over and above the agreed-upon price as a way of apologizing for inconveniencing this genius director. The film, unfortunately, was a victim of its own success in that it was so popular that everybody wanted to have a copy, but not everybody wanted to buy it legally. Remember Edison, our old friend? Well, he had found a way to really stick it to Melies in the end, and that was a way to generate a film negative using a film itself. And so he bribed a theater owner who was showing it in London to let his people borrow it so that they could create a negative off of that and then crank out copies and sell it all over America. It's kind of ironic given this ending you're seeing here, because the whole point of this is to show these self-congratulatory imperialists who think they're so great but haven't actually done anything themselves. Likewise, Edison himself was making money hand over fist on this film that he didn't make, that he pirated. And sadly, Melies wound up going broke just a few years later and was unable to create more films. While ironically, the very Hollywood that is so ticked off that you might copy a Blu-ray onto your computer has a star of Hollywood dedicated to Edison. And yet it's Melies who really deserves far more credit than Edison regarding the advancement of what Hollywood is, because Hollywood today is mostly about narrative films, which is something that this movie, as well as so many others that Melies had done, had really advanced, had shown that it could be done and done well, captured people's imaginations, and overall just made going to the cinema worthwhile. Hollywood has so much to thank to Melies in general and to this film in particular.